hey, hey, it is me, it's Rich. It is Thursday, so you know what that means. When it's Thursday, that means it is scooting, time for the Scooting Scholar. Thursday, May the 24th, 2018. I don't know why I still want to say 17. It's been 6 months now, almost, that we've been in the year 2018, but I still sometimes forget just a little bit. Anyway, I hope you all have had a fantastic week. If you are here in Southern California, you know that the May gray is in full swing, and the June gloom will be coming right along its tail in just a few days. Well, I guess next week. We should have the May gray from the middle of May until the middle of June, basically. And, of course, this is also a Memorial Day weekend. So I hope you are all set to have fun with your barbecues and picnics and all that good stuff. All right. Like I said, I'm Richard Lawrence. I'm a Scooting Scholar. Thank you so much for joining me. All of you out there, whether you are joining me live or whether you are watching me on a delayed recording, either on YouTube or Facebook. Once again, I am trying to send my signal, well, I'm sending the signal to YouTube, but the last 2 weeks I have had problems with the audio out, so I consulted the web to see what I might be doing wrong, and I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that maybe this week I am doing the right thing and that I will have audio out as well as video out. The weird thing is that the audio does show that it's pumping out audio, but for some reason the software that I'm using, and maybe someone out there knows about Open Broadcaster, OBS, Open Broadcaster software. It's open source software, but maybe someone out there knows what I'm doing wrong, and if you could tell me, I will be your friend forever, that's for sure. Anyway, lots happening in the news. Of course, we have the wedding on, what was it, early Saturday morning. Did you watch? I did watch a little bit. It was a good wedding. You know, I'll tell you the thing that, and I should have looked up his name. Maybe I still have an extra tab here. Let's see, sermon, royal wedding. Here we go. The highlight for me was watching Bishop Michael Curry give the sermon. And of course, those of you who, if you did watch that portion, you know he went about 15 minutes, which was probably about 14 minutes longer than the Brits are accustomed to hearing in a wedding. But he was definitely a very interesting and engaging speaker. And he brought a style that definitely the folks there in the UK were not accustomed to hearing. At the same time, though, while he brought that, I guess you could say that the what we might consider an African-American style of preaching into the pulpit there, at the same time, you know, you could see he was a very erudite, well-spoken minister. So he definitely broke down the word that he was giving in such a way that everyone could enjoy it, I guess. But again, perhaps people were looking at their watches a little bit because they weren't used to hearing such a long sermon at a wedding. Nevertheless, I thoroughly enjoyed him. All right, well, let's see. What did I want to start off with? Well, I guess I'm going to have to start off with the NFL. You know, a lot has happened this week, like we've already discussed, but definitely starting off with the NFL is probably the way I'm going to have to go. Unless you've been sitting under a rock or kneeling under a rock or something, you probably know by now that the NFL has updated its policy. Let me see, do I have anything on that here? They've updated their policy in regards to what players can do on the sidelines. Now, for the last 2 seasons, and really it was last season that it really kind of blew up. But in 2016, right, draft in the fall, well, actually late summer of 2016, during the preseason, then San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick initially began to sit out the national anthem, sitting on the sidelines as the national anthem was played. And then a little bit later, and then after it was pointed out, someone took an overhead shot of Levi Stadium. It was a game against the Rams, and it was pointed out that he was not standing up. That's when it began to garner more attention, although he had already been doing it very quietly. Garnered more attention. He continued to sit out the national anthem, but then he did talk to, I guess, a Green Beret who said, well, instead of just sitting out the national anthem, why don't you kneel as a form of protest, but at the same time showing respect. And so that's what he began to do, and slowly but surely other players began to do it. But then, of course, it wasn't until after last season, after the president this past last fall made a bigger issue out of it, that it really began to become a big issue, that it began to really take center stage in people's minds. And so now we have the NFL, which for whatever reason feels that they have, it's almost as if they kowtow to the president. I was looking up some different articles trying to find something appropriate, and one of the articles I saw mentioned how the NFL seems to be afraid of being called out by the president. I'm not sure why he only calls out the NFL on this, but the NFL seems to be very much afraid. Now, I will say one thing about the NFL. You know, the NFL is steeped in America, right? Much more so than the other sports. Basketball is a world sport. Although it may have been invented in the United States, it's a world sport. Hockey is not really America's sport. It's more, or the United States sport. It's more Canadian sport, right? Canada and Northern Europe, big hockey, that's where hockey is played a lot, right? In Northern Europe and in Canada, and of course in the United States as well, but it's not seen as our sport either. Baseball, again, while it may be our sport, it has roots in cricket, and baseball is not just big in the United States, it's also big in Japan. It's very big in many parts of the Caribbean, right? Places such as the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and Cuba and Venezuela and even in Mexico. So the NFL, though, football is truly our as in America. I guess you could say North America. Football is played in Canada. It's pretty much the same game. There are some slight differences in the rules, but for the most part, it does look the same. But it's still dominated by U.S.-born players, and the U.S. teams definitely dominate the spotlight when it comes to football. And of course, the Super Bowl itself is America's one of our de facto national holidays, but that's not actually on the calendar, but Super Bowl Sunday, right? So the NFL is very much connected, I guess, much more so than the other sports, to or is defined as the American sport. And so I guess the NFL has taken it upon themselves to maintain that level of patriotism, or what I would kind of consider sort of a brand of faux patriotism, though. But anyway, the president went on, and let me see if I have this highlight right. Let me pull up my screen here. Let's see if we have this right. But this was the president just this morning, I believe, May 24th, on the Fox and Friends show. I'm going to rewind it just a little bit. Let's see what happens here if we play this. Oops. Go live here. Oops. All right, and
national anthem and the NFL owners did the right thing if that's what they've done.
If that is the story, do you feel like you pushed this story forward and you pushed this to a conclusion?
I think the people pushed it forward. This was not me. I brought it out. I think the people pushed it forward. This country's very smart. We have very smart people. And, you know, that's something ideally could have been taken care of when it first started. It would have been a lot easier. But if they did that, they're doing the right thing.
I think it's a 7 out of 10.
Okay,
what you just
so-
brought up is true. You're going to say,
Okay, they're missing
let's,
4
stop
players from
that.
before the...
All right, but anyway, I kind of missed the part, but basically he said something to the effect of, well, maybe these players shouldn't be playing in the league. I didn't rewind it far enough. I apologize for that. Maybe these players shouldn't be playing in the league, or maybe they shouldn't even be in this country. Quite strong words, for sure. You know, the president has it all wrong. You know, and in fact, if he hadn't brought so much attention to it, I don't know if we would have as many players involved. Personally, I do understand, from an employer standpoint, I guess I can see employers do have a right to tell their employees what to do. But I heard something interesting on a radio show just yesterday. A labor attorney, I believe he was a labor attorney, called and said that because of the president's strong stance, players might actually have a case that now it becomes a First Amendment case. You know, it's one of the things even I used to make this mistake. A lot of people sometimes mistake that our First Amendment applies to all aspects of life here in the United States, and it does not in terms of the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, the First Amendment says that the government cannot silence you, but a private entity can. But in this case, because the president has sort of involved himself, it's very possible that this could be a it could very possibly become a First Amendment issue. Myself, I think a way around it. Now, I did also hear that I guess they're saying any kind of protest. I'm not sure what that means. So perhaps maybe players, this could extend to players raising their fists in the air. But I can't believe if all players locked arms and bowed their heads in reverence, that would, while still showing a sign of protest. And remember, the whole protest is over the injustices that people of color, mainly black people, have received at the hands of our police, something that has gone on for decades, if not centuries. That's, could that be, while seen as a silent protest, would that be in violation of the NFL's policy? We'll see. My own personal feeling is that, I would definitely bow my head as a reverent gesture, I guess you could say. If I'm going to be fined for kneeling, although I still don't quite understand why kneeling is so bad. And this is just one more thing I will add. Personally, I'm just going to be honest with you, I've never been a fan of our national anthem. Not because it's our, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's just I didn't like the tune or how we, like I learned in one of my communication classes at USC years ago, Kenneth Burke referred to it as a secular prayer. But there's just something about that song I never liked. And it's really funny because when you read the words, let me see if I can pull this up really quickly, the StarSpangled Banner lyrics. I didn't know this until just last year. Here we go, StarSpangled Banner lyrics. It's the second stanza that is very troublesome. If I can find that now. We don't sing the second stanza. That might be, that is true. We don't sing the second and third stanzas of the StarSpangled Banner. But let me see if I can find. All right. it's written in a language in English that I'm not all, that takes a little bit of thought, but the second stanza, let me just show you the second, or excuse me, it's actually the third stanza here. That's a bit troublesome, because it seems, at least it seems to glorify the institution of
slavery. And if you look there, it says on that fifth line, so, well, let's just look at it. And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood was washed out, their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave. Now, again, and then from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave and the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave. Now, the interesting thing about this is Francis Scott Key was known to have had some issues with some of the black residents in Washington, D.C. at the time. So, well, or what became Washington, D.C. It wasn't Washington, D.C. actually at the time, but in that particular area in Virginia and Maryland. But I don't know, there's just something about the song I've just never really liked. My personal favorite would be more like, what is it? Oh, Beautiful, America the Beautiful. If anything, I would prefer that as our national anthem, but that's neither here nor there. But definitely the players, though, as far as the players are concerned, I do hope that the
players do not stop their protests. This is a very important, it at least keeps the issue in the spotlight, despite how many feathers it ruffles. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks. One other thing that, one more last thing before I move on to something else, one last thing that I did read this morning is that the NFL's vote was a little bit different than most votes. It was not a full, I guess it wasn't a full vote of the ownership. It was one of those things where an executive committee pushed the rule through without any discussion, without any full discussion from the owners. And then, Roger Goodell says, gets up and says that they've come to this agreement. But again, it just seems as though the NFL has this fear of being called out by the president, and I'm not quite sure why they are what they're so afraid of. But like I said, we will see what happens. All right, well, moving right along. The other major story in the past week, I don't remember which day it happened on, but it was the Santa Fe school shooting. In case that's something that we all have heard about in the last few days. And I heard something this week that was a little disturbing to me, and that is the father of the school shooter
is trying to blame his son's crime on being bullied. So as it says here, the father of the teen gunman charged with slaying the 10 people at a Santa Fe, Texas high school says his son was bullied by his classmates. The son took his father's guns, and he, let's see, what did he have? A shotgun and a .38 caliber handgun, and that's what he used to murder his some of his classmates and teachers. So anyway, the father goes on to say in this article I'm pulling up is from the Orlando Sentinel, but it was pretty much all over newspapers across the country. Basically, he's saying though that the bullying is what led to it, because his kid was, what does he say here? He was nice and polite, a good upstanding boy, and he never got into a fight with anyone. I don't know what happened. We are all devastated, and of course I understand that, but nevertheless, does that?
I still don't see how that is any excuse for the havoc that he wreaked on that high school last week. Something else, though, that I found very, very interesting is because we have now, it's funny how we become, desensitized, right? And I'm going to talk about desensitization in a second. But we become, I guess you could say, desensitized, or at least it's not as big of a story because only 10 people were killed in this particular incident. When I was watching the news the day that it happened, that the nightly news, it was about the 5th story on the local news here in Los Angeles, the 5th story. Whereas, of course, when Parkland happened, it dominated the airwaves. This is not to say that we haven't heard a lot of coverage of the story of this Santa Fe high school shooting, but it's just it just struck me that because it wasn't as big or bigger than, I guess you could say, the Parkland, right? I always want to say Lakeland, the Parkland, Florida incident. It doesn't get nearly the coverage that Parkland did, and I certainly don't wish to see a school shooting that eclipses Parkland. But again, I just found it fascinating that this story was kind of buried in a way because again, it wasn't as sensational as Parkland or out sensationalized the Parkland shooting. And speaking of desensitization, did you hear what the Lieutenant Governor of Texas had to say about this, about the Santa Fe shooting?
This is an article from Slate Magazine. Texas Lieutenant Governor blames Santa Fe shooting on abortions and video games. Abortions and video games. So
so either of those things must somehow have an effect on why this young man, this kid actually, he's not a young man yet, but the 17-year-old decided to shoot up his high school because, well, he must have been playing violent video games, and perhaps because, well, as the lieutenant governor says later in the article that, well, both video games and
abortion show a devaluing of life. He says here, we have devalued life, whether it's through abortion, whether it's through the breakup of families, through violent movies, and particularly violent video games. Psychologists and psychiatrists will tell you that students are desensitized to violence, may have lost empathy for their victims by watching hours and hours of video violent games. Now, while I will admit that, of course, as far as
video games are concerned, I'm sure there is some desensitization, right? If you've played any of the first-person shooter games, of course you're going to be less freaked out by seeing blood, at least on your screen. But I would not necessarily equate that to real life. The video games are just that. They're games. They are fiction. In fact, they're not even using actors. These are computer-generated images. So it's very different than seeing someone shot to death in real life. I have there's no doubt in my mind that when it comes to real life, a real life situation, that people are not desensitized. Instead, if anything, they are probably more freaked out than ever before. And while these shootings actually don't happen very often, they happen often enough, and they get so much coverage that people, I'm sure, think they happen much more so than they do. Again, there's still too much of it, but I'm not sure if it's quite as much as people might imagine. So I don't think there's any desensitization at all. But to blame it on these things as a way of trying to wiggle out of the gun debate. Now, I will admit I don't consider myself a big Second Amendment advocate, but I do take more of a libertarian stance when it comes to things like this, and I'm not going to take away anyone's guns. I'm not going to ask them to give it. Well, maybe I would ask them to give it away, but if they choose not to, I'm not going to. I would never force someone to give up their guns. I just question why people. I do question the fascination. I do question the belief that having a gun will protect you, because this shooting happened. Okay, yes, it happened at a school, but even the one that happened at the church a few months ago in what was it, outside of San Antonio, while someone next door to the church did have a gun, it didn't stop the shooting from taking place. People were still killed. The argument is that, well, the shooter would have killed more people. Perhaps he would have, but it certainly didn't. That doesn't bring back those who already were victims of the shooter. They already lost their lives. So I'm still, like I said, I don't believe in taking people's guns away, but I just question the value of having firearms. All right. Well, anyway, that is what was going on down in Texas. Now let's move on to some, at least to me, much happier news. As you'll see, maybe not everyone's so happy about it. But if you if you watch any news about television I guess in this case it would be streaming video, but it still falls under, I guess, sort of the television realm. Entertainment news. How's that? In entertainment news,
if you haven't heard, our former president, Barack Obama, and his wife, Michelle, inked a production deal with Netflix, undisclosed amount, but they'll be producing, and I guess it says even starring in some shows for Netflix. So that's a very big deal. I don't know what kind of shows they plan to bring. I don't know if they are going to be doing more reality type shows or documentaries, or will they be scripted shows? Nevertheless, the Obamas have signed a deal. They've already signed a major deal. I can't remember who the publisher is, but $65 million, I believe it is, for their memoirs. So the
Obamas will be coming to a streaming device near you in the near future. I guess I don't know if they're calling this a first look deal, or if it's just an overall deal. But nevertheless, the Obamas are getting into the entertainment business. Of course, we live in an age where everyone gets offended by something, right? I think some things are legitimate and some things are not. But take a look at this story. This is on Forbes.
As you can see, the Obama content deal with Netflix. Stokes calls for conservative boycotts on Twitter. So now I don't know if people will really boycott Netflix, but I mean, give me a break. You're going to boycott Netflix because the Obamas have signed a deal. Even if the Obamas have shows, even if you dislike the Obamas, I don't think that is a requirement that you have to like them. But it goes without saying, the president and his wife had zero, I repeat, zero
scandals in 8 years in office. I mean, I guess the biggest scandal would have been perhaps his older daughter taking a hit of marijuana, and that's really, that's not him, and I'm not even sure if she did that while he was still in office. And perhaps the only other big scandal I can think of is that he was a quasi-secret smoker. But other than that, I'm not sure what else you can say about them. Okay, maybe you don't like their policies, but is that enough to boycott the network? Sure, he wasn't president at the time that he signed his deal with NBC, but we have a president who's in office now who basically made his name, became a household name around the country because of television. Now, true, there were many of us who knew who he was. I've known who Donald Trump was since I was a teenager. And maybe that's partly because we share a birthday, just in case you didn't know. But I can still remember watching CBS Sunday Morning many years ago when Trump Tower first opened. I think that's probably when I first heard of him. He also had a bicycle race called the Tour de Trump back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Of course, pretty much everything he has a name after himself. So I've always kind of known who he was. But he really didn't become a household name until The Apprentice came on, and it was actually initially it was a pretty big hit for NBC. So again, yes, I know he wasn't president at the time, but I just find it hilarious that people would even want to consider that you would consider dumping the network, or excuse me, dumping the service, dumping Netflix, because you feel that because they've signed a deal, or they will have programming that is produced or stars the Obamas, that somehow that means you should just leave the network completely. But I guess people have a right to whatever they want to do. So what are we going to do about it? All right, the last thing, I should have, let's see. Oh, yeah, well, let me see. Two more things. One other thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to politics, and I forgot to mention this, I didn't put it on my show notes. But, one of the, I know a lot of people don't like the president. I'm not a big fan of him, we feel that he hasn't, many people, I shouldn't say we, but many people, especially on the left, feel he hasn't accomplished much. And that's arguable, how much has been accomplished. Definitely got the tax cut. They drilled that tax cut through, or drove it through, bulldozed it through Congress. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. But there's another area, as far as the healthcare goes, that didn't work quite as well as they had wanted to. About the only thing they were able to get rid of was the mandate. But I will tell you one area where the president has been very influential, and as one of my favorite radio hosts, Michael McConish, has mentioned, that this has far-reaching implications for many years to come, and that is in the judiciary. You might remember that prior to President Obama leaving office, he had nominated someone. I can't think of his name now. I'm always forgetting names. It just came to me right now. But he had a nominee for the Supreme Court, and basically the Senate held it up to the point to where it was withdrawn, or it died because a new president took over. So that nomination was no more. Instead, President Trump, then not long after taking office, nominated Neil Gorsuch to replace the spot left vacant by Antonin Scalia after his death. Merrick Garland, that's what I was trying to think of. Merrick Garland's nomination stalled. The Senate refused to even consider Judge Garland. And so we had to wait until Trump took office. He immediately went in a different direction and picked up Judge Neil Gorsuch from Colorado, who's the same age as I am, just a couple of months younger. And we can see the effects of that already. And the reason why I say that is because this particular case that definitely bothered me when I heard it this week, even though it may not necessarily affect me ever. I don't know. I don't know if it will, but it says here that the Supreme Court upholds agreements that prevent employee class action suits. So basically, what we will see happening is that what we could see happening is that with this, employees who are not covered by collective bargaining, for instance. Now, believe it or not, I am covered by collective bargaining because I do teach at a public college. But people who are not covered by collective bargaining, you can think of suits from, people suing Walmart or suing, I think Nordstrom got sued a few years ago, McDonald's, those employees, they have no collective bargaining. But what happens is that, and these employees oftentimes sue because of either some kind of workplace discrimination, or oftentimes where they were denied overtime pay when they actually had to work extra hours. And so by going the class action route, an attorney is willing to take on the case and work with that class, I believe that's what they call it. And if they win, of course the attorney does get a windfall, but employees actually receive the benefit of that class action suit as a group. But the way this Supreme Court decision appears is that that will be no more, and employees will have to go one by one. And in fact, I believe as it says here, the Supreme Court decision allowing employers to keep
employees from joining together in wage and hour disputes could have a dramatic and lasting impact on the American workforce. So it says Congress has instructed that arbitration agreements must be enforced as written. And as you can see in that third paragraph there, Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion.
So again, this could have far-reaching effects on employees in the near and far, well, I should say in the near future as well as in the years to come, unless Congress were to change the laws. But as they stand right now, they definitely, with this Supreme Court decision, definitely put the power back in the hands of employees. And one of the criticisms of this is that, while as an individual employee, sure, I could bring a lawsuit, but because, especially if I'm a low-wage employee, if I'm working at a fast food joint or a retail store, I'm not making the kind of money that even if I win my case, the amount of money I might win in that case probably does not cover the attorney's fees that I would be responsible for after all of the legwork that the attorney will have to do on my behalf. So this definitely, again, really puts the power back in the hands of the employer as opposed to the employee. So, and we will see more and more of this, as has been pointed out. Many of these, Gorsuch himself, he is just 50, going on 51 years old, so he's fairly young. Well, actually, he's quite young, if I may say so myself. He's a young justice, right? He could serve another 40 years. The way it seems like justices last forever, Supreme Court justices last forever. Judges in general, the federal bench is also where the president has actually nominates people to the federal bench. And from what I hear, he's been nominating people in their late 30s and early 40s. So again, these judges, conservative judges, could be on the federal bench for 30, 40, even 50 years. And that could have a huge impact on the future, on the direction of what sort of laws that we will see enforced here in our country over the next half century. So it is something to be wary of. That is for sure. All right, enough of the bad news. Like I said, I talked about the NFL, talked about the Texas shooter, the lieutenant governor, talked about the Obamas, talked about the scary part of the Supreme Court. Finally, I did want to talk about something that was a little bit funny as far as I'm concerned. Now, those of you who, if you are watching and you don't live here in Southern California, especially if you live in the Southeast, you might be familiar with Publix markets. Publix markets. It's a company-owned chain. Actually, I went to one in Nashville. I went there a couple of times. The last time I was in Nashville back last year, and really nice markets. And I do love the fact that they are employee-owned, and it's considered one of the best places to work. It constantly ranks up near the top, Publix markets. Well, I'm not sure exactly what was going on with their. Well, now I think someone's blaming it on software, But I'm sure we're all familiar with the term summa cum laude, right? That means you graduated at the, what is that, the highest honors in your class, graduated with highest honors. Summa cum laude, it's a Latin term. Well, for whatever reason, someone at Publix or some software at Publix didn't like one of the words, and it wasn't summa, and it wasn't laude. And so this
is what the cake looked like. Summa dash 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 laude. As if they thought that the cum in summa cum laude was for something else. Anyway, so I think it says, the person who ordered the cake says, "I can't believe I'm the first one to ever write summa cum laude on a cake." The mere fact that the software could not be overwritten is
what strikes me as funny. That was the person who actually, I can't believe a machine did all of that. The person who put out the cake, did they really think that it was just supposed to be dash, dash, dash? Well, maybe they did. Maybe they did. All right, well, that is, I don't think I have anything else for you this evening. Let's see, anything? No, nothing else. Just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me. I do want to give a shout out. I promised this person that I would give him a shout out. I just want to thank my friend Nestor McFarland for being such a loyal viewer. He always makes me feel good by hyping me up. He even tells his friends about it, so it's pretty good. And I did see the ratings. Well, I shouldn't say ratings, with viewership. Thank you to those 75 of you who viewed last week. So each week it gets a little better. Well, actually, it was really good a couple of weeks ago. I think I had almost 180, but that's because a couple of you shared it. So feel free to share it. I like to look at the number. You know, remember, this is my vanity project, my little hobby. But it's just something I like to do. I like to share some of my thoughts with the public. But anyway, just want to thank you all again for joining me. Remember my mantras. Number one, the first thing always is that things always balance out. You might be down today, but you will be back up tomorrow. And my second one is, I actually reread it, and it reads a little bit differently than I've been saying, but basically it's, don't try to be better than someone else. I think I was saying don't worry about what others are doing. But either way, don't worry about what others are doing. Don't try to be better than someone else. That really doesn't matter. Be the best that you can be. If you are being the best person that you can be, that's really all that matters. So once again, thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you again next Thursday, because if it's Thursday, like they say, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. Well, if it's Thursday, that means it's time for the Scooting Scholar. Thank you, and have a great night and a great Memorial Day weekend.